What if someone told you that 6 million years ago there were already hunters in our lineage? It would probably sound crazy to you, because our earliest ancestors were apes living in trees, right? Wrong. Hi, it's me and this is life. 6.4 million years ago. 6.4 million years ago was the dawn of the Eocene Epoch, a time when the first primates appeared in Africa. But they weren't monkeys or apes. They were tiny proto-simians with big eyes, and while their brains were only about 40 cubic centimeters in volume, about a third of our own, they were perfectly adapted for life in the trees. They ate fruit and foliage and were generally cute little guys. Over the next 20 million years, these primates would evolve into the lemurs of today, and perhaps even some of our closest relatives, the tarsiers. But back then, the world was very different than it is now. The continents were still joined together in a supercontinent called Pangaea, but they would soon drift apart and we'd have lemurs in Madagascar, monkeys in the Americas, and tarsiers in Southeast Asia. So where does that leave the hominids? Well, scientists think they evolved in Africa, and after 4 million years of being small forest dwellers, they finally began to venture out. And now we meet our star of today's episode, the first true hunter of humankind, Sahelanthropus chadensis. This 350-pound primate had a brain like modern humans and used tools and hunted other animals. He also lived a whopping 6.4 million years ago. That's 2 million years before the split between chimps and bonobos, and 4 million years before Australopithecus afarensis, aka Lucy. You know, the one everyone's always talking about. Yep, that guy. So how do we know he was the first hunter? Well, for one thing, he walked upright on 2 legs. Scientists say he may have done so with a slight forward lean from his hips, which is unlike us, but certainly better than knuckle walking. And what's more, he had big teeth in the front of his mouth for tearing up plants, and smaller teeth in the back for grinding them up. Kind of like a hyena, actually. Hyenas are scavengers, but they will hunt, too. And I imagine this guy was probably the same. The only problem is that his skull was crushed flat, so scientists can't tell what his face looked like. And they can't really tell if he was a hunter, because he didn't leave behind any bones of animals he may have killed. That's right, we have no physical evidence that he was a hunter at all. What we do have is his stone tools, though back then, the forest was full of wild fruits and vegetation that was perfect for eating, but not so much for building a shelter or making a tool. So early humans likely used stones, sticks, and animal bones for these purposes. Unfortunately, organic material like that doesn't preserve well in the fossil record, so the oldest tools we find are made of stone. In fact, these are the oldest known stone tools in the world. They were discovered in 2010 at a site called Kusa, Cali 3 in Chad, near where the skull was found. They include hammers, anvils, and cutting flakes that were all created by striking stones together. These tools were made by smashing rocks of a certain type that were likely found along a riverbed. But the process of creating them was pretty complicated. Each rock had to be struck just so to produce a sharp edge that could be useful, and then those edges had to be carefully maintained. So what's the significance of these tools? Well, our ancestors hadn't exactly been using them for the previous 6 million years, so it stands to reason that they learned the trick from someone else, maybe a chimp or a gorilla. But studies show that these hominids must have had an average IQ of at least 70, which is higher than most animals. Maybe they even organized themselves into groups to go hunting. Just imagine that, a pack of early humans working together to take down prey. It might have been necessary because the food supply was becoming less reliable due to the changing climate. You see, forests love water and shade. So while they thrive in areas with consistent rainfall, they don't do well in dry, hot places. And that's exactly what was happening around the world. There was a lot of tectonic plate movement going on, including the formation of the Himalayas, which pulled moisture out of the air and caused widespread dryness. But forests weren't the only ones affected by this climate shift. Savannas were drying out too, and the animals living there had to adapt or die. Take the Sahelanthropus himself. As I mentioned, he was pretty big, kind of like a Bigfoot, actually. He weighed 350 pounds and stood about 5 feet tall. See, this is why it's important to remember that the hominids weren't all small, frail creatures like Lucy. Some of them were big and strong, built more like NFL players than ballerinas, and this guy's size would have helped him survive in the changing environment. Perhaps he used his large frame and sharp teeth to hunt down game and feed his family. Maybe he had a wife and kids and a cave to live in. Just imagine him sitting around the fire with them, telling stories about his adventures on the savannah. It sounds kind of romantic, doesn't it? Well, it was until he realized that he probably didn't have a fire. Not only did he predate the discovery of fire by millions of years, but he wouldn't have needed one to stay warm. After all, he lived in Africa, where the average temperature is 78 degrees Fahrenheit. No, he wouldn't have needed a fire for warmth, but he would have used it for cooking, which requires a fire. Cooking makes food safer to eat, easier to digest, and packed with more nutrients. And who knows, maybe he even roasted a nice juicy antelope over the fire and shared it with his family. Okay, let's be honest here. It's highly unlikely that he cooked his food. In fact, he may not have been able to start fires at all, but he would have been smart enough to scavenge around the remains of a fire where other animals had been cooked and eaten. You know, just like today, there's nothing wrong with scavenging, and it probably saved his species from extinction many times, but it wasn't easy. Scavenging meant traveling long distances and competing with other predators for food. And sometimes there just wasn't anything to find. In fact, food was probably so scarce that the hominids started eating each other. Yes, cannibalism. It may sound crazy, but there's plenty of evidence of it in their caves. Archaeologists have found cut marks on bones that suggest they were hacked apart to get to the nutritious marrow inside. Some of those bones even have bullet-shaped marks left by knives, and others show signs of being boiled. Needless to say, our ancestors weren't exactly polite dinner guests. As you can see, life 6.4 million years ago was a wild ride. There were huge changes in the climate and the food supply, and animals had to adapt quickly or become extinct. The Sahelanthropus chadensis was one of the first to rise to the challenge. He was a hunter, a scavenger, and a survivor. He may not have been the first hominid, but he was certainly one of the most successful. And what's more, he changed the course of human history forever. Without his intelligence, resourcefulness, and bravery, we may not be here today. So next time you're eating your dinner, take a moment to think about this guy and all the other early humans who came before us. They were real pioneers, and they paved the way for us to become the dominant species on Earth. Now, I want to hear from you. Did you learn something new in this video? Let me know in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing journeys through time. Thanks for watching. See ya.